Hands up those of you who don't live in a city. 2, 3, okay. Okay, oh, there was half a hand up there, I'm not so sure. No, you... It's a hard question, I know. It's a hard question. And thank you also, by the way, to Paula Kravitz, who has worked on with me to curate this session, which is fantastic. Just to get a sense of you guys in the room before we begin, I want to know, there's a lot of brilliant sessions to choose from this morning. In fact, there's a lot of schmoozing to be done in the marquees outside, and you've discarded the schmoozing, you've discarded the other sessions, you've come here today, and I want to make sure that we can give you some value, so you leave feeling that it was a good decision. You didn't have to scratch your head thinking whether or not it was worth your time. So how many of you are social entrepreneurs and innovators working in some way related to the city? Okay, handful of you. Funders, financiers, a few more of you. Hi. It's a pitching session, isn't it? That's what you think. Yeah, we'll just ask them. 1 minute, tough call. How many of you are looking for ideas? Ideas which you guys might want to implement in your city, or ideas in different ways. A lot of you, a lot of ideas. You've got to keep them coming, okay? The pressure's on here. That is fantastic. I hope we live up. And if we don't live up, give me a shout and say, please, we need more of this, and I'll do my best to deliver. Now, we choose all but 3 of us to live in cities because these really are creative cauldrons. They attract talent from far beyond their borders. When people arrive in cities, they cradle hopes, they cradle dreams. And I think what's really interesting is the word citizen, because it doesn't really mean just somebody who lives in a city. There's a lot more action, a lot more imperative and agency, responsibility about that word. And I think that's what makes this conversation so exciting. Of course, also cities are places of focuses of intense challenge, of poverty, of pollution, of alienation, and of violence. But what's so brilliant about the city is its diversity and the opportunity for different type of encounters. And it's those sort of encounters of the other, of difference, which allow new ideas to flourish and game changers. And that's why so much of innovation happens at this intersection. And I hope that today, with people with very different backgrounds, we'll get a little bit of that collaboration between different ideas, and of course, you guys here in the room as well. And I'm really honoured to have a fantastically brilliant panel here with me today, and they're all world-recognised pioneers in different ways who are empowering creative talent in the city. Before introducing them, just a few little bits of house business. I'm sure you guys know by this stage to silence all your cell phones. Feel free, though, to use the hashtag, because we want the conversation and the sneezes to go far beyond this room. So if you could make sure you use tweet Skoll.org, that would be fantastic. And also, you can continue the conversation afterwards. The session is being filmed, so watch out if you want to be anonymous or you really shouldn't be here or you're pretending not to be here, because it is all going to be filmed. And yes, it's not going to be live streamed, so that's a relief. So let me just introduce our fantastic guest, Rodrigo Guerrero, who's a bit of a legend, and I have to say, oh no, you're far too modest. But an unlikely leader, though, because he has been a leader of one of the most crime-ridden cities of the world in Cali, Colombia. And after a training as an academic, as an epidemiologist, somebody who's studying disease, and now you've got, is it 8 months left of your second term as mayor? Only 8 months. Yes. Okay, the clock is ticking. Okay, yes. And but you've been celebrated for a host of innovations that you've actually brought to the city. So it's not just talk; it's actually do. He's enabled using data to transform in a host of different areas, and most primarily dealing with and tackling the violent gangs which terrorized your city and others, and your work, of course, has spread way beyond Cali, so it's really fantastic. One thing he said, which I rather liked in a conversation he said to me earlier, he said, you know, he's not a normal politician because politicians don't tend to be rational. Which I rather like. Now, Sue Riddlestone, it's exciting to have her here because, of course, you are an SASE, an awardee, a social entrepreneur awardee, so very, very relevant to have you here today. And really championing a sustainable way to live. the leader of Bioregional. It's an engineer that you've pioneered over 20 years ago, and you've done so many interesting things. I think one of the most remarkable is the way that you have developed this sustainable plan for the 2012 London Olympics, which I'm sure most of us all watched, even if we weren't living in the city. But not only did you develop the plan, you also worked with the Mayor of London to implement it, which is, of course, a whole different ballgame. So, but you don't, of course, only work in London. You've worked across the world, and you've also been working in Guangzhou in China with a real estate developer. So it'd be really nice to hear some of your international expertise. Now, Benjamin Barber, as I should call you formally, a big innovative think person who has really been a thought leader. And I was actually just looking online at some of your work this morning, found that in 1992, a really interesting interview, and you said in it, citizenship is a full-time job. And somebody who has thought about cities for such a long time and really focusing attention on the potential of cities and their leaders to rise beyond their dysfunctional nation states in order to tackle very big global challenges, climate change, migration, a whole host of others. And at this moment, he might look like a very calm gentleman, but in fact, he's plotting a revolution in global power. Yeah, and this revolution is happening in October, and we're going to be very excited to hear more about the plans. Now, at the opposite end of the power spectrum is Alessandra Orofino from Rio in Brazil. And she works in this bubbling metropolis to use technology to transform power structures, to really engage citizens in a host of different ways to participate, connect with other citizens in a host of different arenas, to create recycling projects, to challenge government decisions about closing down important schools. And it's really brilliant. And it's interesting, I was privileged to sit next to her Wednesday night for dinner. Now you're going to wait, what I'm going to tell about you. But what I found out was that this kind of collaboration and meeting other people was very important to her personally, because she was initially studying in Paris, where she met her husband-to-be, who's a pastry chef. And had she not gone to study in Paris, she would have never had that encounter. So these encounters, of course, aren't just for ideas. They're also for us personally.
And for croissant.
And for croissant. Yeah, you have to do without, though, this week in Oxford. And I'm sure the English croissant don't quite live up to that. Before we kind of get stuck in, and I...
Can your husband make Brazilian cheese balls?
Yes, he can.
Cheese balls.
He's working in Brazil now, so he's had to learn.
Yeah.
So before we kick off, I just want to hear each of you briefly, and we will also be really wanting to have participation from the floor as well, because I know how much you guys have a stake in these questions. But just very briefly, in order for us to kind of create some pictures in the mind, some pictures of a positive future, I want to hear from each of you about to paint a picture of an ideal feature in your ideal city, something that we can hold in our minds when we're grappling with the real world problems that we're going to be during this session.
Well, that's extremely difficult because ideal cities do not exist. I can give you, so that you can have an idea, I have a picture of Cali as it was 70 years ago and it is now. Please bring me the slides. Because it has grown dramatically in the last 70 years. So what we have now was completely different. I said it was there. Okay, next one. I should be able to move it. Well, this is something, cities do not make poor, they attract them. We know that. Poor tend to close in the highest risk of the city, but this is Cali. This is the one. In the yellow rectangle was Cali in 1943 when I was a boy. It had 135 inhabitants. Now it has 2.5 million people. It's the yellow, the perimetry. And you see on the right-hand side is a Cauca River, which is the lower part of the city where most of the poor concentrate. This is the violence-ridden areas, the most. And then this green thing is a ballot we won. It's a lottery we won. There's an abandoned railroad. It's 17 kilometers to go through. We are converting into a public, 1.2 million public space. So we have grown dramatically.
I don't want you to use all your arguments in the first little couple of minutes. So if you've got an image or something that you want to point to, here.
burgeoning city close to the Pacific, strategically located, is for Colombia and for the region extremely important.
Okay, so we've got a bit of a tourist pitch here in case you want to consider your next holiday.
Salsa capital of the world, by the way. Some of you might be interested.
Sue.
Okay. I want you to imagine a city where we are not dominated by cars and what that would mean. Just think about it. So think how much all of that space that we use for roads and parking cars, we could use that for public spaces. I was walking down the road in Oxford today and there were about hundreds of us on the pavement all falling into each other and all this space for the cars. Mm-hmm. How crazy is it that we're like 100, 150 pound individuals and we're going around in these huge metal things with this noisy internal combustion engine. We just don't need it. I think in the future people will look back and just think that was absolutely mad. What were they thinking of? So imagine this future where we are not dominated by cars. It would be, we could have green space, we could have public places to meet each other. It would be peaceful because the noise of the car, it was waking me up every morning here in Oxford, staying in one of the colleges. We could have electric cars. We'd be able to talk to each other. We'd be able to congregate. We'd be able to actually breathe fresh air. Pollution is a huge problem and bad for our health. The public transport would be so easy and convenient. Hop on, hop off, wherever you want to go. We can walk and cycle, and that means we're getting out and we're meeting people. It's more friendly, we're getting fitter. We don't need to waste time going to the gym because we've worked this into our lives. And probably many of you are doing all these things. So, and when we need a car, because sometimes we do, we can hire one. We could hire an electric car from our conveniently located car club. And I haven't owned a car for years, so it can be done. And I think that's the density of cities is what makes this possible. And in London, where the mayor has started to adopt some of these things, we've got a 10% lower carbon footprint, but also, you know, people are feeling the benefits. There's still a way to go, but, you know, if we could just, so imagine that and don't forget, don't drive a car.
Thank you very much, Sue. Ben, what's your ideal feature?
You know, when we think of the city, we think of the polis, the ancient Athenian polis, and the word for politics comes from polis. I think about the cosmopolis when I think about the city. I think about the connections between cities. Even in the ancient world, the Mediterranean League of Cities, in the 10th century, the Hansa League. Today, there are dozens of city networks. We tend to forget that cities aren't just about local municipal government. They're about dealing with global problems. The cities I think about, therefore, when I think, are not the big mega cities that dominate the world, but the smaller cities that make themselves part of the world. I think of Bristol, England, whose mayor, George Ferguson, is an independent, not a Tory or a Labour candidate, who is one of the 4 elected mayors and who has made Bristol a center of inner-city cooperation. I think about Stuttgart, which in Europe has been a driver of Euro cities and all kinds of ecological things. I think of Mayor Park of Seoul, Korea, who has made Seoul the center of CityNet, an Asian network, who just had a remarkable meeting of ICLE, the Environmental Issues Group, and put out a Seoul Declaration, and who was the host 2 years ago for the very first planning meeting for the Global Parliament of Mayors. So when you think about cities, don't just think about polis, think about cosmopolis, think about their connections and their interconnectivity, and remember that it's not always London and New York that do that well, but lots of smaller cities that understand their role in a modern world, which cities have a better chance, I think, to rule than nation states.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Benjamin. Alessandra.
I think, well, my ideal city would be impossible to govern, with all due respect. In the sense that it would be a city where people just refuse to let a handful of elites fight for power and use every single public service as a bargaining chip for winning the next election. Most cities in Brazil don't have good mobility systems because mobility is the place that candidates for mayor go to get money to maintain themselves in power or elect their successor. And I think that the city that I would like to live in the future is a city where that's impossible, not because we have created a better political system or a better electoral system, but because citizenship does not let big decisions be made by a handful of people in a closed room without any consultation or transparency.
Thank you very much indeed. I hope that's got some thoughts. Any one or two quick features that anybody else wants to join in for us to think about when we're having this discussion? Would you want to wait till we warm up a little bit? I've got one over there. Let's just hear one then. Would you want to wait for your microphone?
Don't forget education as you think about cities and growing the next generation that will eventually lead them.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for that. I want to turn to you, Rodrigo, and please feel free to bring in more slides if I know that you've got one or two that you want to show us, because I think it would be really nice. I don't know how many of you know Rodrigo's work in terms of what he's done in Cali? How many people do not know his work? Okay, that's a lot of people. So I just think it will be, because he's actually brought about this revolution 20 years ago and again today by being incredibly innovative. And I think I was just so excited reading again about his work in preparation, and I would really like you just briefly to be able to share it with us.
Okay. My first reaction to this first round is that from a practical point of view, cities afford the opportunities to do cost-effective interventions in education, in health, and all these otherwise extremely difficult things to carry out. So we want to improve quality of life. You have in cities the opportunity to do it. If they were living in the countryside, they will be very difficult. So there is it's there the opportunity to do. So once you have let me see let's see. Well, you see, this is Cali, as I mentioned. You see, the red line is the Cauca River. Then we had a dike. It was built 50 years ago. If that dike is going to, by any reason, it will be interrupted, we will have 900,000 people of Cali in severe conditions.
Wow.
So, but of course, those are the poorest peoples of the area that move into that area. But on the other, this is the homicide rates of Cali. You see them along with a lot of faith, as I do. You can see them on the right-hand side border these extreme poverty areas. So we decided to invest. We chose those 9 areas, and we have put in the last 2 years $80 million focusing social interventions in those areas to correct the inequity, improving quality of education, quality of living, lightening parks, all things. So that was a unique opportunity to help these 800,000 people that were living there that otherwise would remain extremely poor. So that was an opportunity.
And what was I'm particularly interested in the way that you've used data, because most politicians are kind of in it for the short term. They're not academics. They don't come with the thinking that you bring to the problem. What is different about the way you've tackled challenges?
I will invite all of you this afternoon at 1 p.m. I'm going to deal with that.
Okay.
The use of data, which, by the way, when you trace it back, was an Oxford professor, a Franciscan friar, in the 13th century, the first one to advocate the use of data for all this information. So I will be dealing with that, which is a very simple thing, but it had to be an Oxford professor to do it.
Okay.
He was sent in prison because of his idea, his revolutionary ideas. He was 15 years he was in prison.
Just to
whet your appetite for this.
I don't want to, but some people might have to go back to London or go back to America. So just very briefly, talk about like 20 years ago when you came to Cali, you looked at the murder rate, which was phenomenally high at that stage. How did you tackle it? What was different about the way you dealt?
Well, first, we began to count. We had a homicide rate of 126 per 100,000. At the time, nobody cared in Colombia. So when we published that, people said, okay, it's Cali, the Cali cartel, you know them. We went to Medellin. They had 400 per 1,000. It was 4 times higher, but nobody had cared. Bogota had 80, but nobody cared. So the first thing was, when we published the data, we said, well, we have a pandemic. It's not just an isolated case, but the whole country was related to drug traffic, as you can imagine. So we began to do what most people do, define homicide, where, whom, and where. In the poor areas, young people, in weekends, related to alcohol and firearms. So when you do this description, as we call it, you plan some interventions. Restrict alcohol sales or carrying firearms. By taking those 2 simple things, reduce by 35% the number of homicides. So that was the idea. And then once you do that, you rephrase your argument, you put it again, go over. When I went back this year This second time, things have changed. It was organized crime. So we set with the national government a group to study and follow organized crimes and follow for the heads. The judicial and the police spend months following, identifying the responsible person, and then they come down and crack the organization. So that's the whole thing, in simple terms.
Thank you very, very much. Alessandra, you've also been using data and teaming up with academics, haven't you, in order to work with some of the citizens as part of your program. Can you explain that briefly?
Sure. I think the first thing to say is that when you make an intervention in a city that is heavily reliant on leadership, it's likely not to last because leadership changes. So unless you address inequity but actually creating a structure of power that is able to challenge it continuously, you're just heavily dependent on having the right mayor at the right time. And I think the right mayor can make a lot of difference, but it's in a way, it's out of sheer luck. And it's just making sure that the leadership is not alone and is actually supported by an active citizenship that can carry out that work in the future. I mean, inequity in public investment, there's a lot of data on that specifically. And one of the good things that I'll say about our current mayor is that he actually disclosed a lot of information about where he's investing and where the city was investing in Rio in terms of actual neighborhoods. And because Rio is such a segregated city, that data tells us a lot about inequity in public investment, because when you cross databases around investment and databases that just show where the problems are, you can see that we're just not investing in the areas, or not to the extent that we should be in the areas that most need it. And that was something that everyone knew intuitively, but then all of a sudden, because we had a leader that was brave enough to sort of disclose that information, we actually had the numbers. Then he didn't necessarily address that, but at least we had the numbers and we could organize ourselves in order to claim more public investment in the areas that needed it the most. And I think that's the best use of data we can make, actually. It's not giving data or distributing data to leaders who already hold all the power. Is making that data available to people and then working with them to actually make them aware of the power that they have so they can demand more public investment in areas that need it, not just be waiting for some sort of some leader to come along and say, oh, I will do this for you.
Sue, you're nodding there vigorously.
Yes, I was thinking how important data is. Like if you're going to create a sustainable city, you kind of need to understand where you are. Where are we now and where do we want to get to? And we all heard, I don't know how many of you heard the amazing talk yesterday about climate change and climate justice. And when you think about it, we've got to get from a sort of average carbon emissions in, say, Europe of sort of 11, 12 tonnes per head down to 2 tonnes each. And I think it's actually 1.5, but Professor Sir David King said 2, so I'll stick to that. But if we're going to get there, how are we going to get there? And mayors are in such a good, cities are such a good kind of scale of a region to take that data of what do we need to be sustainable and kind of see where do the impacts arise. Is it the transport, the food? How can we help the citizens to live this life that future-proof our lifestyles and make them low carbon and resource efficient? And in London, we did that and actually measured it and came up with a standard for measuring the embodied impact of cities. And we worked on that and called it, it's called the PAS 2070. So any city can take this kind of methodology and use it to work out where are our carbon emissions, not just from from everything we consume, like the clothes we buy, not just the fuel in the tank. So I think that's a good outcome where cities can collect and measure data, develop methodologies, and then share it with other cities.
Ben, I just want to come to you now, and I think I know you really want to talk about the Parliament of Mayors, so I thought let's go for it now, because I think it's an opportunity.
Let me link it. I'm happy to link it, though, to these issues we're talking about, because they're directly related. And let's start with the climate issue, because I start with the reality of a global crisis in democracy and governance. The world is not well governed. States are not doing the job. The UN has failed. We will have in Paris in December the 21st meeting of the Conference of the Parties of the UN Summit on Climate. For 21 years, nations have gathered and then explained why they can't go do anything and gone home again. cities have already been doing things, and this is a response to a larger dilemma. The dilemma is we live in a 21st century world for which ecology and environments are the perfect example of interdependence. There's no problem of Oxford warming, despite the weather 2 days ago here. There's no problem of English warming or American warming. It's global warming. There's no problem of Rio immigration or of American immigration. It's a global problem of immigrants all over the world following the logic of the global economy, global markets. Terrorism is a global phenomenon. Pandemic disease. When I grew up, I get a cold in New York and worry about New Jersey. Today I worry about Ebola. I worry about the Hong Kong virus, Mexican pig flu. We live in an interdependent world of interdependent problems, global problems. Yet the responses come from 17th century nation-state institutions, independent, sovereign, and thinking that they can deal with inside their own jurisdictions with just about every problem there is, whether it's the market, whether it's crime, whether it's, crime in Colombia is an emanation of a global drug trade and all kinds of other things that you have to deal with, but it's not just a Colombian or a Cali problem. So we have a governance system based on sovereign, independent, distinct states and a set of challenges that are global and interdependent. And the crisis of democracy, the failure of democracy, the failure of governments, and what leads a lot of young people, I think, to not believe in states and leadership anymore because everywhere they look it fails, is to say, what are we going to do about this disjunction? And I say, as everybody on this panel is, let's come back and think about cities, not just mayor-led cities, but citizen-led cities. Cities are the place where still there is participation. Around the world, trust rates in local government are 60 and 70 and 80%. Trust levels in national governments are 40, 30, and 20%. In the United States, it's 8% trust the Congress that Americans themselves elect. So that disjunction points to cities as a solution, and we already have a host of city networks and climate, ICLAE and C40.
And let's hear about your one that you
Right, but that background is really, because if I just say, yeah, there's a global forum of mayors, that's nice, and what else is happening, you know? Because the background is we have a world in which cities play a very great role, a very important role. They are networked, they are working on climate in the C40 and ICLAE. What they lack is a governance organization, a place where they can meet globally and make decisions that affect governance, that affect law, that create common policy, not just there are many, many ideas like yours, which are so important, but they need to do it together. So about 120 cities are scheduled in the fall in Bristol and in London to inaugurate a global Parliament of Mayors that will have cities from all 5 continents, from Colombia and from Rio will be represented, in Tijuana, and from all over the world. They will come together to try to establish not simply another conference and a discussion and a sharing of best practices, which is great and which we already have a lot of, but to try to create an organization capable of common governance in facing the global, cross-border, interdependent challenges of the modern world and rekindle hope in the possibility of governance. It pains me when you say, you're right, leaders forget it, they're corrupt, they come and go. No, but you're right, I would say that too. But we need leadership that speaks to the people. We need leadership at the local level, and the local level is the base. You're not working in Brazil, you're working in Rio to try to make a responsive government. So what I say is, let's give cities a chance now, not just to associate and share, but actually to govern. And this is an organization that will make global governance by cities a reality. If the mayors do it, I can't do it. They have to take on.
You are putting this together, and that's tremendously exciting, and you've really been the driving force. But let me hold you accountable. What will be your metric of success for this group of people? That it will be more than just them getting together and everybody congratulating themselves and feeling important and feeling that they're not only head of their city, but they're head of the whole world together.
Vital question. In the first year's topic, because of the COP21 in December, will be climate change. And there are a lot of places doing it. We are developing a climate agenda. Next week I'll be in Hong Kong with the Nobel Laureates Climate Symposium. We're working with the C40. We're working with ICLAE, which is the environmental
But what will change by you guys meeting together?
That within a year, if cities are not making a fundamental difference on climate, not in 5 years, the UN's talking about 5, 10, they're talking about 2030. If by 2016, 2017, cities are not having an impact on carbon, on greenhouse gases, through this organization, then come to me and I won't eat my hat, but you can slap my face if you like, you can do whatever makes, some people would like to do that anyway, but do what you want.
So they're reducing their own carbon emission by a significant amount.
And not just that, there are decarbonization that's about waste and efficiency. It's not just, as you say, carbon goes into many different things. There are ways to use coal for graphite and plastics that doesn't require it be burned. So, there are lots of different ways
and this
to
is going to be, there's going to be ways to measure it. There are going to be stats. We're going to be able to see.
That's what we are, talk about measurements. We are developing an indicator that will allow many different approaches, transportation, waste, efficiency, use of carbon, to be measured across cities so that every city can say, however we do it, whether with transportation, infrastructure, insulation, we can prove we are making a significant contribution we were not making before.
Great. Okay, we will hold you to that. I know you want to speak,
promise.
but earlier on, Alessandra, you were looking very skeptical there. I don't know if you noticed Alessandra's face, but I thought, go on.
No, I'm not skeptical. Now, the first thing is that I do believe in leadership. I just don't believe in an accountable leadership. And I think all of our leaders, including our mayors, are mostly unaccountable. Trust levels at the city level might be higher than they are at the national level, but people just vote less in cities too. They don't actually care about electing their mayors. In most democratic countries in the world, people just do not show up to vote for their mayors. So there is something wrong when we know that people care a lot about what happens in their city. We know that whatever public policy decisions are made at the city level will affect them very rapidly and very closely, but yet they don't think it's important to elect that leader. And I don't think it's just about politics being most of our institutions being very old. I think that's part of the problem, but I think the main problem is that people are not organizing enough. They don't see their own power, and if they don't see their own power, there's really no point giving someone else power.
Talk a bit about your own organization, because you've done something which has been pretty radical. I think you say that 1 in 13 of Rio young people between 20 and 29 are now participating through your platform. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about it?
We help people organize. So we give them technology, and we have a team that will support them if they meet other people that share common goals and common preoccupations in the city. They can join those communities and do actions together in the city. So try to influence public policy, try to pass a piece of legislation, change a public space, and they do that by acting together. So we have 200,000 registered members. They work across 1,500 communities of action, as we call them. Those communities of action meet online and offline.
So it's not just virtual, it's in the real space as well.
It's in the real space. Yeah, one of my favorite communities of action, they are users of the train system. So the train system is really, really bad in Rio. And they can, by contract, derail the trains 3 times a year without it being a problem. And the users of the train system, they have a community of action, they meet online, they organize online, but they also hold monthly meetings offline inside of the train. So they actually meet at rush hour, they take the train together, and they discuss their issues and preoccupations and plans for action inside of the train. And because it's like a 2-hour ride, because the train is so bad, they have plenty of time to discuss. But that's the kind, and then they will coalesce around specific issues or specific points of intervention that they have and make those demands in a collective, intelligent way. And we have a team to support that. So we have a PR person, we have a sort of lobbyist person, we're like a crowdsourced, crowd-funded lobbying firm for the people with a lot of technology. But the thing is, our democracy was made for people who organize themselves effectively and efficiently, but people who organize themselves effectively and efficiently are the ones who already hold a lot of resources and power. So we're just having a conversation amongst the same sort of 25 rich people that live in the city, and no one is ever allowed in the room. And when you try to bring people into the room, what you hear is, but if everyone is allowed to speak their mind, this will not be feasible. We can't govern like that. And I'm like, that's true, we can't. We have not built institutions that are actually able to process the needs and wants and dreams of the collective city, of actual people. And I'm not even talking about personal democracy. I'm not talking about individuals coming and speaking their minds, which would be even harder to do and not necessarily something that we want to do. I'm talking about people who are organized in communities, in collectives. They are discussing their needs and wants already.
So what can we do more? I think the biggest hands up I had from everybody here was that they wanted more ideas. So what other ideas do you want to be able to present to give people thoughts? And I think there's people who want to contribute here too. But just very briefly, before hearing from Sue, from Rodrigo, and then going to the floor.
I think the Parliament of Mayors need a Parliament of Citizens. I think we need to go beyond just leadership. If mayors can meet and meet again and talk about collective plans, and then they come back to their cities and there's no one to keep them accountable. Our mayor lies. He does lie, and it's specifically about carbon emissions. He's actually changed the definition of carbon emissions in the city to take a whole new source of carbon emissions through our newfound oil economy out of that. Like, we lie at the national level, we lie at the city level. We're literally making up figures. So like, it's statistics that they may present at that international forum. If there's no one in those cities to make sure that those statistics actually reflect reality,
So
those
you
plans
work
will fail.
with the mayor of London and
Yeah.
mayor in other cities. Go on.
Well, what I was going to say was, I personally have felt empowered as a citizen, and I think when I was younger, maybe, I don't know about your age, we had in our local area, they enabled neighbourhood forums, so you could go along, you could get involved, and for example, we didn't let them widen the road by the historic old duck pond, and that's kind of stops the traffic from flowing through and things like that. And then I think that was somehow empowering, being able to get involved in that way. So that is something that anyone who's elected or, you know, in any sort of even devolved within a city can get on and let citizens get involved. Or maybe you can ask to set up a neighbourhood forum in your area. But more than that, I think most recently in the UK, we've got the neighbourhood planning legislation. So that means that groups of neighbours can get together you can define the area that you're working in, and you can make a plan. And that plan has a legal, once you've got it through, local people have to vote on it. It has to get at least 51%. And then that plan becomes legally binding, and the local authority, when they make any decisions, they have to bear that in mind. It can't contravene. You can't sort of say, we're going to shut down the oil field. But you know, it gives some power. But what I found really interesting about the whole process is it's unleashed all this creativity in the community. Sometimes the meetings can be a bit difficult because, you know, you've got all these different people who, you know, they're not all on the same page, they're not wealthy or really well educated. But it started, people have just, what's really happened is it's not so much about our plan as how citizens feel they can go out and do things and made things happen in the community, whether it's a new sort of local ecology area that we're working on or planting up the area.
You know, about self-empowerment. You talked
Yeah.
on the phone about people kind of being released from the cages in their own
Exactly.
minds.
Yeah, but it's like
very powerful.
people feel like, what can I do? I'm just a citizen. I can't. If I vote, it doesn't even make any difference. And it is a cage, and I think it makes people feel like the cage door's open. You don't necessarily come out, but if you come out and get on with it, it's amazing what you can do. And when we, Purin, my co-founder of Bioregional, Purin's up the back there. When we were early days of Bioregional, we thought, we need an eco, you know, we need a green building, we need an eco office. We're worried about the way we're living, we're consuming too much, and we kind of got on with it ourselves, and we put together a sort of eco housing project. We took it around, we found a site, we took it around, we found someone to put up the money to do it, and that became where we live, where we have our office, and a sort of world famous reference example. We weren't architects, we weren't engineers, but somehow we just had just enough of a feeling that we could come out of the cage and we could get on with things. And you know, I would just encourage everyone, I'm sure lots of you here are all like people that can do things like that, but I think that it's amazing what we can do if we try, and how we can change our neighbourhoods and change the world in that way.
People doing that in Cali, Colombia?
Let me put a reflection, going back to some of Benjamin's initial ideas. Mayors problems are felt in the cities, mostly. And it could be violence, could be global warming. And the mayors frequently are requested to do things that they don't have the slightest idea what it should be done.
That's a nice admission here.
So what we did in violence, as an example, it was Cali, Medellin, and Bogota, the three cities of Colombia, that we noticed that we had a violence problem. It was not the central government. Then we wanted to obtain money. So we discovered that a homicide rate of 400 per 100,000, which is frightening, horrible to anyone, doesn't mean anything to the planners. So we did the economic studies, and we found that in Colombia, 15% of the GNP was wasted because of violence. That caught the attention of the planners. We began to speak GMPEs, which is the language that planners and Minister of Planning do. So when we have that, then we went to the Inter-American Bank and got the first loan ever to prevention of violence, but it was originating in the cities. And then mayors tend to be very practical. They want to show results. So what we did, we designed a couple of interventions, have weekly meetings of the people of the interested in violence collection, so that you have reliable information and you have tips on where to restrict alcohol sales, practical tips that could do. And then the whole thing began to disseminate. So I will go in this global warming, talking to the mayors of global warming. What does it mean to Cali, global warming? But if we can show them that the floods that we have had recently is related to that. And that's furthermore that we can do things like improving public transportation, as we are doing, moving into the whole area of public transportation, and we get the banks finance those interventions, then we will be able to find a solution. So because otherwise we will remain discussing in Orlo, which is the coldest place in Earth, to discuss global warming. I don't know what was the purpose of doing that in that city. So we have to come down to Earth with practical solutions, otherwise we will be lost.
Brilliant, thank you. Let's just hear from the floor some really good, and please keep your thoughts brilliant but brief, and also wait for the microphone. Brilliant thoughts of innovative ideas to tackle some of the city challenges we're discussing. The lady over here, wait for the mic.
I don't know that I have ideas. I actually would have a couple of questions. My name is Dina Sharif. I'm from Cairo, which is obviously a city with a lot of problems. So I just have two questions. Is really, how do you create an inclusive city where everyone has access to opportunity when you live in a city where decision-making is incredibly centralized, where active citizenship is not allowed, and where poverty is incredibly high with a population that's growing at an exponential rate, and where governments are launching new cities? And I'd love to hear your thoughts, because I know that Brazil created a new capital as well. So how do you really work on creating an inclusive city when you're faced with those kinds of circumstances in a growth market? And I say growth market as opposed to emerging market, because we're still economically growing. My second question is to...
Can I just stay with the one question, but I want a question. When you say how can you create the cities, who is the you?
How can we as citizens, as social entrepreneurs, or even as people who are actively engaging with the government? So yeah, and then my second question is very quick to Benjamin, is that I think it's really nice that we want to connect cities globally and really important, but how can we do that when we can't even connect cities locally? So I think, in a country like Egypt, we have these urban centers who are completely disconnected. And I would love to get your thoughts on how to create that interconnectedness within a country so that we can go to that global level.
Okay, let's gather a few more questions.
My idea is to hack the government from inside.
Okay, what does that mean?
I'm an information security officer. I work for the government.
In which city?
In Rio, Brazil.
Okay.
So I would like to hack the government from inside. So I try to make connections with another groups like this, and I get ideas, and I try to hack and convince people from inside and try to break the system from inside.
That's a really interesting question, because in a way, creating change, one of the hardest things is to challenge vested interests. People who, vested their power, their financial capital in the status quo. How do you, because you perhaps have had more experience working from the inside trying to create change, how do you do it? And I'm also interested in how Rodrigo does that.
Inspire people with ideas that are real cases, not bullshit or walk my talk, showing my own examples. I think this is the only way that I can convince through their hearts from inside out. That's why I'm telling you about this. From inside out.
We mustn't lose track of all these good thoughts, so let's just, you, the last person.
Hello, I'm Jorge from Duende Foundation.
Where are you from?
Duende Foundation, Spain and Poland. All over Europe, we can appreciate cities that don't use European fundings, for example, from the Urban Program Operative, because of the politicians. Because, for example, they need to make some partnership between cities, and because the mayors are not from the same party, the money is just not used. So one of my ideas is to put something like a pseudo institution close to the mayor city, let the mayor to run as a CEO of the city, but not let all the power and all of the budget development in the hands of the council, of the city council. Because, you know, just because of party issues, all of us are losing every year a lot of money for our cities.
Okay, so let's just quickly go back to the lady over here from Cairo. And first, Barber, how to create allegiances and relationships between people within a country, let alone internationally. Briefly, please.
The important question when you talk about cities, whether it's corruption or their isolation or being part of a national regime that's tyrannical, as it is in Cairo right now, is as compared to what? Cities as compared to what? And what I say every time is cities have a million problems. They're corrupt, they're poor, they're in some countries not bound together, they're subsidiary to tyrannical powers. But compared to national government, it's a theater where you can operate, where you can hack, where citizens can be involved. You can keep the mayor, Eduardo Paes, a little bit honest maybe, because you are there. It would be much harder to keep the Brazilian government honest. It's where we happen. In Cairo, you have a better chance to do it than in Egypt. Right now, you've got a military dictatorship, unfortunately welcomed back by liberals who couldn't take the outcome of an election and wait till the next one. Instead, they invited the army back, and the army, you know, did what it did, and we know what it did. But the fact is, I would much rather be in Cairo or Alexandria working on this problem than kind of in Egypt. Let's take on the Egyptian government. That's not going to happen. So, but you are right. The connection between cities is important. In many countries, there's a Mexican Conference of Mayors, a Canadian Association, Municipal Association, American Conference of Mayors, Japanese Conference of Mayors, and they are creating those links inside. But we have weaker connections nationally. In Egypt, I agree with you, the problem is getting those internal connections. A lot of countries have the internal connections, but they don't have the global connections. And when they do have the connections, it's to talk, to share, but not to act together. And let me say, I mean, this is a revolutionary. I am not suggesting that cities wait around for their national governments to say, it's okay for you to go and meet and do a few things. Cities have 80% of the population in the developed world, 54% of the population in the world. They have 80% of GDP. They have 80% of carbon emissions and have to deal with it. They have most of the crime. They have the terrorism. Terrorists don't attack farms. They attack cities. They're dealing with those problems, and it's cities that have the right, not just the responsibility, but the right to do it, in part because there are people like you there who will be pushing hard to make them honest. We ought to have a parliament of citizens. If I did it, you'd say that's just another old white guy, you know, taking them on. You need to create the parliament of citizens with your colleagues around the world. But cities can do it. So it's not that cities are the answer to everything. It's that we have for a long time not thought about cities as primary solvers of problems, as pragmatism. And when we start thinking about them, we make a lot of progress. Do we solve every problem? No. But you know, in the 60s, I was in the peace movement. We used to chant, all I am saying is give peace a chance. Today, all I am saying is give cities a chance. It's time.
Thank you very, very much. One thing just to... we've got a lot of city support here in this room, I can see. It's something we can all agree on, isn't it? You asked about how to create those opportunities of change, especially in a place as tough as Cairo, for all those different reasons. And in order to create change by social entrepreneurs, by cities, another really big challenge is dealing with, Rodrigo, what you've called the crisis of self-esteem. It's brilliant that you're working with all sorts of young people, Alessandra, in order to get them involved. But how do we change people's mindsets in order that they can feel that they can make a difference and become more active and take those sorts of opportunities you have made? Rodrigo, first of all for you, because you've done it and can talk from experience.
Well, self-esteem is a requirement for any individual person to thrive or progress in life. The same happens in cities, and self-esteem in cities are destroyed. We had a period of very bad mayors that were heavily influenced by the drug traffickers. So the city went into despair, and we thought we couldn't do nothing. When the thing began to change, there are some practical, we had a World Games, which is equivalent to the World Soccer, with 86 countries. I don't know how many 100,000 of people going into Cali, and that began to say, people of Cali say, we can do it. Then we had a meeting of presidents of the Pacific Coast. We have never been to Colombia. They met in Cali.
I told you he's doing a bit of a tourism pitch here. But anyway, carry on, Rodrigo.
And so the thing began to change. But in the end, you mentioned at one time on passing, that was bad luck. And we Caleños, people from Cali, traditionally thought that we had bad luck. And I always tell them, when I was a medical student, my professor of surgery, once he was discussing a case that had died, and he said, look, Rodrigo, those surgeons whose patients are infected or die, they don't have bad luck, they are bad surgeons. So I keep telling Caleños, we don't have bad luck, we are bad citizens.
But how do you make people into better citizens? How do you, as mayor, what are your thought processes?
Well, you have to preach, develop practical examples. People, and they are smarter than you think. Being honest pays. When you see the amount of things that can be done if you don't steal the money, people understand that. But then you end up having elections and then educating, and that's difficult.
Participatory budgeting, let me just say,
yeah.
A great idea that came out of Latin America was participatory budgeting, participatory zoning, where a city will take 5%, 2%, even 10% in Paris today of its budget, and there you are. And what happens is that you bring citizens into the budgetary process. Spending money is the thing that government really, you say to citizens, okay, you spend it, take this part of the budget, then you deal with all the interest groups rivaling for it, but take the responsibility in power. So participatory budgeting, there's no nation in the world that does participatory budgeting. There are now 600 cities around the world that do participatory budgeting because they're closer to the citizens, and even when they're corrupt, they've been forced into sharing, bringing citizens into it. So it's another good example.
And just another really good example that I was reading about in your book was about how mayors working together, and just because of the power they have to spend money, talking about budget, can create big change way beyond their cities. And you talk about the example of gun control.
Right, it is. And you mean in this book that you were reading that's available in Blackwell's down the street here? I think that's the one. Speaking of tourism, this is literary tourism. Please come and tour my book. The marketplace, we talk about cities, and it's not just citizens, and it's a three-legged stool. It's civil society, which is citizenship. It's business as well. And in the cities, private-public partnerships work a whole lot better than at the national level, where the old 19th century ideological quarrels between the proletariat and the owners continue to be fought. But at the city level, businesses get involved. And there's a mayor in New Jersey named Stephen Fulop, the mayor of Jersey City, who was trying to deal with the influence of the gun lobby. In the United States, it's basically impossible to ban guns or even regulate guns because of a gun lobby that has about 10-20% of the population, but in effect does the Congress. So he had this idea. In America, 20% of all guns and ammo are sold to municipal police forces. If the municipal police forces of America do common purchasing, which is another idea for how cities can work together, if they do common purchasing, they can say to companies, if you do cop killer dum-dum bullets, if you do big magazine rifles and automatic rifles, we won't buy from you. No gun regulation, but the companies will know that 20% of their sales vanish unless they stop the 1% of their sales of those dangerous bullets and those big magazine guns. So there's cities working together through market and common purchasing. Same with alternative energy.
Are you doing any of that, Rodrigo?
In Colombia, we are in a worse situation because guns are manufactured and sold by the army. So we have to convince the army. But my suggestion that has not been implemented is that the money they get doesn't go directly back to their budget. It goes to the general city.
The budget of the money from?
The money from selling guns doesn't get back to the army, but goes back to the national budget. So they will be reassigned. I'm trying to do that because they have a particular interest in selling
Selling guns and increasing the violence in your city.
Absolutely.
Wow, that's a tough one. Sue.
I really wanted to pick up on what the lady from Cairo and the man from Brazil said about how to influence our cities, and just sort of building on what I'd said earlier, really, that we did this project, this famous eco-housing, eco-village project, and then this thing about where we live, and that changed the mind, that real example changed the mind of the local authority into thinking, oh, this is really good, they're really proud of it, they bring people to see it, and they decided to, we formalised the approaches that we used to create this community into a framework of 10 principles, which we call One Planet Living. It's about sustainable living. And they decided that they would adopt this framework and use it to create a plan for the borough. So this is one of 33 boroughs of London, the City of London. And then the mayor liked it and had us work, asked us to work with the people who were working on London's Olympic bid. And so we used the framework then at an even slightly bigger scale. It's then gone on to be, the ideas have gone on to be used in the whole country of Wales, which is a subsection of Britain. But it's just that thing that once you make the real, create the real example, it has that credibility. I think that is a really important point. And the other thing that I think feels very important to say is, yes, people are corrupt, but they're all just people. And what I've always found is if you just try to find a like-minded person who's in some decision-making position, you know, just talk about your ideas with enthusiasm, and you just don't know what might happen. Amazing things happen. I would have never have thought we'd been able to achieve what we have been able to achieve. So, you know, I just want to encourage you, really.
Yeah.
I know, but you could try. You just never know.
I think that's true to some extent, but reacting to the two questions as well, I think the first thing, I don't think you can actually create a more inclusive city if you have an exclusive government. So I think the first thing you need to address is the fact that that is a centralized authoritarian government, and that's hard to do. That's dangerous to do. I think there's a lot, and I think that the better question is, how can we, as citizens of other cities where we're perhaps facing not easier but different problems, and we're not necessarily in harm's way all the time, how can we support that effort in Cairo? So that kind of linkage between cities, it cannot stop at the mayor's level, right? Like, it needs to happen at that level.
Very briefly talk about the work that you're doing, because you're training people in other cities in
we're training
Latin
people
America.
in other cities. So if you want to create my Cairo, come talk to me, and we can plot that revolution together. But I wanted to react to their two questions as well. I think one of the things that I've learned through this work that was not something that I had thought about before I started doing it, is that when you have citizens organized, you're not only putting pressure on government, but oftentimes you're also helping and creating the political space for people inside of government that want to create change but don't have enough negotiating power. Mm-hmm. So if you're someone inside of the mayor's office and you want to push for a specific policy, but there's no one talking about it, that's one thing. If you have 20,000 people knocking on your door, next time you meet with the mayor, you can say, listen, this isn't me.
Yeah, you're nodding over here.
This is 20,000 people knocking on my door. And that just shifts the conversation even internally. So a good way to hack government is by also creating alliances with people. And they may be exactly what you need in order to advocate for change from the inside out. So making sure that we're talking to people inside of public administrations as people, and recognizing that those public administrations are also, they have internal conflict. People do not agree internally, and there's always a matter of like resources and where they allocate it to, and recognizing that complexity, I think, is really important. It's part of what our team tries to do as they work with communities, because that's hard for people to understand. They see public administration as one big thing. And when it comes to budget, participatory budgeting could be an answer to that. So I would think about that.
Gideon, you had a point, and I know there's a lot of hands up over here. Brilliant and brief.
Microphone?
A microphone, yeah, good point. This is being videoed, we want to capture it. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
So just briefly, we've been running
a just say who you are?
Gideon Barber from Ecopeace Middle East, an Israeli-Palestinian Jordanian organization that includes work in democratic and non-democratic countries. We've been running a grassroots, community-based, mayors-involved program, Good Water Neighbours, for 15 years. And what we've found is that the general truth is leaders, be they at the national level or at the municipal level, don't lead. There's an exceptional mayor, but most mayors follow. And the trick is to create the constituency, is to create people from the bottom up. But on a relative basis, mayors lead more because they're closer to people. And they'll lead more quickly. And you talked about peace before. Well, we have Israeli, Palestinian, Jordanian mayors working together, when at the national government, they continue to refuse to work together. So, they're more accountable. They can be made more accountable, and therefore there's more room for success. So really, I think that's why this session is just so important to highlight that whether it's a democratic or a non-democratic, a corrupt or a more transparent, there are more possibilities at the municipal level than perhaps at any other level.
Fantastic. Many, many thanks. That lady over here.
Hi, I'm Eileen Herring-Woods. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Parliament of Mayors, and I have the privilege of working with Dr. Barber. And my point is that knowledge is power, and to ask the citizens to come together and work is a great idea, but what do they know? And so the issues of the rights of the cities, the rights of the citizen and the cities is something I'd like people to discuss.
Other thoughts from the floor? Guy over there in the third row. Please wait for the mic. And just also begin by saying who you are and where you're from.
Sure, thank you. My name is Isaac Jonas. I'm a Mastercard Foundation scholar at the University of British Columbia, but I come here as a Skoll Mastercard Young Leaders Initiative. So my question is, my understanding is it's more like a political economy. There are some stakeholders involved in dealing with development, whether it's at government level or what. And indeed, there are some stakeholders who are powerful and others who are, I would say, less powerful. So how do you strike a balance between those without necessarily favoring another group to ensure equity?
So I just want to clarify the question. How do you strike a balance when trying to create change? What sort of balance are you?
Okay, to achieve the goal development, given that naturally there are other powerful groups, like interest groups, like in that sense. So how do you strike the balance so that there is equitable development in that sense? It's more like a political market, right? There are others who are powerful, and like I understand life, people would push for their agenda. So how do you ensure that the lists, those people, I would say, with lower voice, are included in the development agenda overall?
Could I ask you, Rodrigo, to address that as a mayor? How do you ensure that you the quiet voices, that they're heard?
It's difficult. It depends on the. I would think most mayors are very practical, and they will listen if given the opportunity. The political definitions at the city level tend to be erased, tend to be blurred. You can mayor, the socialist mayor, a capitalist mayor, because you are confronted with practical things you have to solve. So what my basic contention, it will be a recommendation for this
meeting
of mayors.
Are you coming along?
I would love to. But what I will recommend is give practical solutions. Yeah. For example, in Bogota, many years ago, designed this public bus Transmilenio, and it went all over Latin America. A public transportation might have all the difficulties you want to, but it was a model that could be exported to Santiago, Lima, many other cities. We had water purification. Sand filtration is a mechanism that is extremely clean to the environment, extremely cheap to operate, but nobody has endorsed it. If mayors should know that those methods are available. Solar energy. We are, for example, next December, we will have the Solar Decathlon, which is a international, I would say, organized by the Department of Energy of the United States to use solar energy for low-income housing. We will have 20 models built. Those things will be, if those feasible, they will be immediately adopted. So develop models that can be, it will help tremendously solve the different problems, forgetting about the ideologies that they will be different. We tend to be practical. As you said, we are confronted with the next election in 4 years' time, so we have to find solutions. Otherwise, people tend to blame mayors for anything. It's a lunar eclipse, then it will be the mayor. Whatever it happens, it's a major responsibility. So.
Can I tell a quick story about, because there's two questions. We have two questions here specifically about bottom-up pressure, and there's a wonderful story.
Very briefly, because we're sort of running out of time, so keep it brief.
It will be very brief. Roosevelt, back in the 30s, had the support of Philip Randolph, the black head of the Pullman's Railway Union, and they voted, they organized, and then he went into power and he did nothing for them. And Philip Randolph went to the White House in 1934 and said, "What are you doing, Mr. President? We fought for you, we expended our monies, we got all of our black guys out, and they voted for you, and you've done nothing." And he turned and said, "You're right, I have done nothing, but that's not my fault, it's your fault. You want me to do it?" He said, "Make me do it. Make me do it." It starts bottom up. It's not will the mayor listen, it's will citizens force them to listen. So that's got to happen bottom up. It's got to happen. That's what you're doing, and that's what it's called. Thank you.
I think there's a real opportunity with, and Mary Robinson was talking about this yesterday, the Sustainable Development Goals. They're really good. They're really good, and they're going to start on the 1st of January next year. They're going to be adopted at the UN. All the governments have agreed it. They've worked in this amazing way of, they've worked together to come up with this, and civil society's got stuff in there that's very, very good. And although the climate negotiations, that whole thing won't get adopted till 2020. So have a look at the Sustainable Development Goals, because think again about what Alessandra said about, people in positions of power in the city. They have a responsibility to achieve these things, and governments will have to report on it every year to the Secretary General. So look at what the goals are, look at what the indicators are, and use that as a hook for the things that you want to happen in the city, because they are supposed to be implementing them starting in January.
Very briefly.
Briefly. So, yes.
Who are you? Sorry.
Hi, my name is Edith Torell. I'm the CEO and founder of Global Laurea, providing STEM and computing education to underprivileged, disadvantaged communities and schools. And so, yes, bottom up, and we need citizens to make mayors do things for them, but mayors need to provide the infrastructure and the access and the education as a human right. So which cities are actually leading in providing high-speed internet to everyone, free? So, and the education, so citizens, young and old, all ages, at all stages, low income, poor, low income, middle class, and everybody can really express themselves and be fluent, a fluent, participatory digital citizen that is educated to actually express themselves. Because my experience is that in a lot of the poor and low income communities, citizens, not only that they don't have access to high-speed internet, even when they do, they are shy and intimidated, and they really need to be immersed and educated in understanding the power that they actually have for self-expression and influencing their mayors.
I think that's really important, but Alejandra, the work that you've done has involved people like that who haven't had the privileges of those sorts of opportunities and infrastructure.
That hasn't. Well, Rio, I'll tell you one thing. Rio is special in a way because we actually have a lot of internet penetration, even in low-income areas. But it has not been our experience that people in low-income areas are less vocal. Actually, it's been the contrary. We have more campaigns being created in low-income areas, in the north zone of the city, in areas that are not as privileged, than in the south zone, which is a rich area in Rio. So we haven't found that citizens that are coming from low-income areas or they're just straight out poor are less active politically. What we have found is that government responds less quickly and less often to them. So it's a lot more about them not being able to convey enough power, and that's what we need to work on, than it is about them not feeling or not wanting or not knowing how to get involved. And I think that goes back to your question too. people will not listen to the little guy. They just won't. They never have, they never will. That just won't happen. So the little guy cannot come to the negotiation table and say, I'm the little guy, please listen to me. The little guy needs to organize and to become the big guy, right? And I think we should not be ashamed to talk about that. Like, that it's not a good thing to be disempowered, and it's not a good thing to be weak. We need to build power amongst the currently weak, and I think, I don't know if that makes you more optimistic, but we have found that the weak actually do want to get more strength.
Free access to high-speed.
But yeah, we don't, and we should.
And education on how to use it really effectively.
No, exactly. So I think there's definitely plenty that the city should be doing when it comes to providing better infrastructure. And access is still an issue in some cases for us. As an organization, what we've done is that we try to build tools that are adapted to sort of no internet situations. So if you're meeting in the train, how can you capture data through SMS? Like, we think that our role then is to respond with like better tools that are adapted to those situations. But of course, the ideal scenario would be those citizens have plenty of access to the infrastructure they need to be vocal. But we can't just sort of be paralyzed by the lack of it. We need to sort of work towards having it.
It's also a two-way street. What's being offered on the internet? 50% of the hits on the internet are pornography, 30%, 40% are shopping. There's almost no civic, educational, and governmental internet out there. It's very hard to find. So you hook people up, and what are they getting? You've got to think about the responsibility on the other side of what the platform, what's being offered. Participant Films that Skoll funds is offering a different kind of film. That's great. We need the equivalent of participant films at the other end of the internet for programming and platforms.
I think we as producers of content too need to be conscious of quality. Like, whatever I put out on the internet, it needs to be good. It needs to be fun. It needs to be sexy and interesting. I can't just expect people to sort of be interested in politics. It's so boring. So I need to make it less boring. And that's
okay, Rodrigo, 20 seconds.
Well, most of the discussions has dealt with the topic of how to engage people to be responsible and choose responsible. To me, it's education people. It's information. But information, I want to warn you, is different from media knowledge. Education is responsible ways of communicating people the results in education, how do they perform in this knowledge test, whatever. These objective indicators made readily available will be extremely important.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I know there's a lot of interesting ideas. I just want to quickly sum up some thoughts that I was just scribbling down, which I'm going to, go away with. That we've all got to learn to speak GNPEs. We're going to hold Benjamin Barber accountable in 2 years' time for big climate change achievements that your Parliament of Mayors have achieved. We've got to create real examples. We've got to share those real examples and give people who, like yourself, are working in cities the lobbying power to make changes. We've got to have bottom-up pressure so that the little guy learns to become and needs to become the big guy. We've got to work and celebrate mayors because they can go beyond ideology to create real change, and it's fantastic having an example of somebody who has done that on the platform here. And we've got to talk to public officials as people and recognize that even though, whether in whatever type of regime they might come from, whether it is in Cairo or in the UK, there's people within who themselves want to create change and just need that lobbying power and the participation in order to do so. I know there's a lot of interesting conversations that we want to continue, so please go online and continue the conversation. And thank you so much to my really brilliant panel, Rodrigo Guerrero, Sue Riddlestone, Benjamin Barber, and Alessandra Orofino. Thank you very much.